Voices of the Archive, Stories of Immigrants and Pioneers, Part 3. I want to say that Mr. John Clark is a volunteer here and has done our sound several times. He did an exceptional job this last week of pulling off a beautiful program called Cowboy Poetry. And I know he was here quite late last night getting rid of all the cowboy increment stuff off the stage and getting ready for us and moderating that whole program and performing himself. So we're just grateful that he woke up from his little nap and made it over here. So.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for coming. My first wife, Charlotte Hauschow, as a girl was traveling from Southwest Missouri in December 1863 with her stepfather and mother, sister, 2 small brothers, aunt, and 2 girl cousins when they were robbed of their teams and clothing. She walked most of the way with her family from Missouri to Texas. Charlotte was a warm Southerner and never forgot that experience, which she referred to as rough treatment, from the diary of Stephen Jennings Tanner, 1900. The fall cattle were rounded up and driven from the valley, the Wet Mountain Valley and Second Mace through Greenwood and Wetmore to reach the railhead. In 1914 or 15, they took the full width of the road. The drive reached us in the late morning and continued passing and raising dust till sunset. Elsie Pilot, Florence, speaking of her girlhood in 1968. Railroad accident. Last Saturday night, Eddie Jones and Josie Kyle started from Rockville for Radiant on the railroad bicycle to deliver a bunch of bananas to the company store. They arrived all right, delivered the bananas, and started back. The grade is heavy, and as they reached the high trestle, the bicycle was going some. There were 3 men sitting on the south end of the trestle, but the bicycle was traveling fast. 2 of them got in the clear, but not so with the other. The tricycle struck him, and while it appears that he was not injured, the car was thrown from the track and the boys both were hurled some distance. Powell was unhurt, but a sliver of wood about 2 inches long entered the hip of young Jones, and he has been under the doctor's care ever since. July 31st, 1913, from the Paradox. Voices of the Archive, Stories of Immigrants and Pioneers is the focused research project for 2021 of the Florence Historical Archive. Every year, the Board of Directors of the Archive chooses a topic of significance to our local history, and members conduct research on aspects of the topic. Normally we present a 2-hour class at the mini college at the Pueblo Community College on the campus in Canyon City. That was until the pandemic. We hope to be back there again in 2022 with a program perhaps similar to the one we're doing this year. In addition, for the last 3 years, we have presented a series of programs created from our annual research project here at the Bell Tower, and we are invited on a half-dozen occasions each year to present brief programs based on our research to local organizations. So if you're looking for a program, we are usually happy to provide. This year we are back at the Bell Tower every second Sunday through November. We have a guide on the back table for this series of 5 programs, which will cover 11 subtopics. Please take one home with you. With this year's topic, Voices from the Archive, our goal was to bring new material to light on the experiences of the earliest people in Florence. We wanted to unearth some of the hidden gems of information from the archive's files in the forms of letters, diaries, newspapers, books, and photos, and as often as possible from the actual voices of early settlers through family stories and memories via interview with descendants of those people. In addition, we were interested in understanding how the village grew, that is, stories of the the events that led to the development of social history, patterns of settlement, culture, and ethnic influences, and other important topics like water resources, neighborhood and subdivision development. Today, Margaret Storm will speak on the reminiscence and legacy of Edwin Beale Loback, and she has spent some time with that research and has the privilege of being not only of having had person-to-person interviews with one of his descendants, John Loback, but also to be a relative of theirs. Her grandmother, Nancy Crouch, was married to
their great-great-grandmother, Nancy Crouch, is a sister to my great-grandmother,
that's right.
Elizabeth Watson.
I got that really messed up. But she's a cousin. Okay, they're cousins. and she will get it straightened out when she's up here. And it's a thrill because, you know, the Loback name has been so common in our area for so long. And it's going to be just fascinating to hear the stories and some of their words, the personal words that Margaret has been able to come up with. So that's our headline program this morning, or this afternoon. And then following her, Dorothy Kuhl, who I know is one of your favorite storytellers, is going to tell us about the Tooth Brothers and their history. That's a very old name here, and not here in southern Colorado, and they have a good connection to our county, so things that none of us knew before, Dorothy has unearthed. And then following that, Melvina Benham will give us a little history of a more commonly recognized family, the family of Stephen Jennings Tanner. So and then another board member, Rita Bruner, will follow up with a conclusion. So I hope you all enjoy the program, and thank you again for coming. So Margaret will start us off.
John and I are cousins.
Kissing.
No, we're not kissing cousins, just cousins. John has spent many hours at the archive with Mel Benham and with me, going through his remembrances, not only at the big house, that big fancy house that used to be at the end of the lane that's still there, but as he was growing up, there were special thoughts that he shared with us. Good-looking man, isn't he? Mr. Edwin Loback Sr., one of the founders of Florence, came to Fremont County 151 years ago in 1870. He was born August 1st, 1834 in Burke County, Pennsylvania, to Samuel and Hannah Beale Loback. Edwin's grandmother on the Loback side was Hannah Beale, and her people were English. They fought in the Revolutionary War on the American side. He was also an heir to the estate that was in England on the Hill family side. Peter Loback was the immigrant who arrived on the British ship Friendship November 12, 1743. The next year he was naturalized and he founded Lobacville in 1745, where he lived for 42 years. So you can see that the Lobacks came here very, very early and were quite proud of their heritage. Both parents had died by the time Edwin was 8. He and his sister Mary spent several years with their uncle, Gideon Beale, his mother's uncle. When he was 10, they moved to Union County until he was 15. He was bound out to learn shoemaking, but he quit after 3 months. He worked on a farm for 1 year for a Mr. Pitt, earning $5 a month. Not bad. Leaving Mr. Pitt, he worked for John Hoffa for a year. He was bound out again to learn saddle and harness making. He served 2 years before running away. Venturing out into the world at age 19, he traveled to Freeport, Illinois, and worked there for 6 months. He then went to St. Louis, where he worked his way up the Missouri River to Fort Leavenworth. Fort Leavenworth was established in 1827, making it the 3rd oldest active military installation in the nation. It is known as the pass that opened the West. Colonel Leavenworth founded Fort Leavenworth on the bluffs of the Missouri River. For the next several decades, Fort Leavenworth played an important role in keeping the peace among the Indian tribes and the ever-increasing number of settlers traveling west. By the 1840s, travel to Oregon and California had begun, and thousands of wagons passed through Fort Leavenworth on the Santa Fe Trail and the Oregon Trail. During 1854, Loback went to St. Louis, from St. Louis to Independence, Missouri. He went to work driving a team of 5 yoke of oxen to Salt Lake, Utah, taking 3.5 months on the road. From Salt Lake, he and 15 other men walked to California. He did a little mining, staging, and saddlery in California and up to Oregon, most of that distance also on foot. In 1855, he worked his way across the desert to Salt Lake, Sacramento, Eureka, and Shasta. In 1856, he went to work for California Stage Company, where he followed staging for the next 2 years. 1857 saw San Francisco, Portland, and then back to California. He panned over $40,000 worth of gold dust. And when he returned to San Francisco, he got a ticket on the sailing ship and went down via the Cape Horn, and up the other side of South America and into Pennsylvania, that direction. He also went to Los Angeles another time that he walked. That time he walked from Los Angeles over to Panama. This was before the Panama Canal had been built. President Roosevelt was instrumental in building the Panama Canal in 1907. Loback walked to the Gulf before catching a ship, this time up, like he had before. A side note that I want to get in here, Fern Loback is Edwin's daughter. Catherine Eggleston is a granddaughter. But in 1958, Edwin had left a note for Fern telling her that he had never worn underwear or socks until he was an adult. I know this is mixed company, but I couldn't let that one go by. In the spring of 1859, he went to Pikes Peak, Colorado, and mined in the gulch at Central City. After a short time, he hauled freight for the government, going to Salt Lake, Fort Douglas, and other spots in New Mexico during the Civil War. At many points, he was trading with the miners until he went back to Leavenworth in 1860 and actually began fur freighting. He crossed by Smoky Hill, which is in East Denver. His merchandising plus mining, plus the transporting, he began from Leavenworth. He packed supplies for the miners in Central City with 2 mules and 1 pony. He was engaged in the mercantile business, resulting in a real good trade with the miners. However, he sold the business in the fall, returning to Denver with 4 yoke of cattle, a wagon, a pony, and only $600 worth of gold. Lost a lot, didn't he? 1862 was the outfitting of a freighting train of 26 wagons, 6 yoke of oxen to the wagon to haul freight to Fort Union for the government. In 1864, he shipped corn for the government to about where Fort Collins is now. It took 19 ox teams, but it fed about 100 soldiers. On their way back, they were attacked by Indians just west of Fort Kearny on the Platte River. Also in 65, he went to Salt Lake again. He did like the desert. From there, he went to Helen, Montana, where he stayed for a year trading and mining. On his trip, he freighted flour, which he paid $7 a hundredweight in Salt Lake. And then he turned around and sold it for $40 in Helena. Time to go back to Salt Lake. He made many friends in this city, including Brigham Young and a Mr. Salisbury, who became a famous racehorse man. That's hard to say. Edwin also joined the Masonic Lodge in Salt Lake. In 1866, he went to Los Angeles and freighted back a quartz mill. It's similar to quartz crusher, where you crush the quartz and get the gold, and that's what's left is the gold. He delivered it to just west of Reno, Nevada, to a mining company. He liked telling the story of the mules running in the night. He had They had a Snow White Bel Air and a lariat to her, with the man holding the lariat and the mules running alongside of her. When the Indians would make a dash for the mules, they all followed the Bel Air back to the wagons, and the Indians couldn't catch the mules. Edwin had about 70 wagons and 150 immigrants that he took from Fort Bridger to Julesburg. Many of them were from Oregon and Idaho, going back to their homes in the old states. The letter that Edwin carried with him was dated July 7th, 1867. Again, he returned west, working in Portland and Placerville. He finally went to work for the Central Pacific Railroad and contracted the roadbed from Sacramento to Promontory Point, Utah. The two railroads met and laid the last rails of the Central Pacific Jupiter and the Union Pacific number 119 on May 10th, 1869. Mr. Loback was given a gold watch for his contribution to the Golden Spike and the opening of the West by the railroad executives. I believe that's still in the family, but not in this state. The first Loback home in Fremont County was a mile south of Marguerite Springs, which is 8 miles south of Florence on the Wetmore Highway. He was married in Wetmore February 14th, 1871 to Miss Nancy Ann Crouch. He and his bride rode a horseback to their house after the wedding. I wanted to turn and point to this picture because this woman is Nancy. This woman is my grandmother, Allie. This man is my grandfather, Willis Watson. And this man is our he's my great-grandfather, Joseph Elira Crouch. It's a couple more greats for John. That makes me sound old, doesn't it? Stephen Frazier sold the Florence ground to Loback. He was a soldier who had served in the Civil War. The government had given him a land grant, and Mr. Loback paid $35 per acre and also threw in some cattle. Mr. Loback wanted to start raising horses, hogs, and a dairy cattle. In 1879, Mr. Loback was elected county commissioner and served 2 terms. It was during his time, and largely through his efforts, that the county courthouse was built in Canyon City. That courthouse is still standing in the 400 block of Macon in Canyon City, and I believe they have apartments in it now. He was given a gold-headed cane from his constituents and that's still revered today in the family. My information says that Edwin and Nancy had 14 children, but only 7 of them survived. Grace, Carrie, Josie, Louis, Irene, Fern, and Edwin Jr. There was a private teacher who was hired and lived in their home until the Florence school was opened. The teacher taught regular studies and gave the girls music lessons. In this large room, they had a desk that was fixed so that all the children could sit together, and they each had one drawer for their supplies. The teacher was from Canyon City, Mrs. Fanny Hannacret. The first graduating class in Florence included Carrie and Grace Loback, Ann McConnell, and Estella Tanner. And that was the class of 1892. That year, Louis also died from a burst appendix, and the doctor could not save him. Like Jesse Frazier and HHC, that would be Horatio Breeze in Wetmore, Edwin Sr. had acreage around the house and he filled it with apple trees so that they had a wonderful apple and fruit orchard. He favored the Duchess apple, Duchess of Oldenburg, and Jeffries. Edwin Jr. was born February 29th, 1876. Leap year. So we've got Valentine's Day, we've got Colorado Day, which is August 1st, and now we've got leap year. Edwin owned the farm, and his son, Philip, rented and managed the farming. Edwin Jr. lived in Florence nearly his entire life. He attended the first public school and later went to Gem City Business College in Quincy, Illinois, with J. Victor McCandless. He also owned the Riverside Dairy on Cyanide Avenue. Shortly before his father, Sr., died, Ed Jr. purchased the home. Sr. was 86 years old when he died. Jr.'s first crops were sugar beets, alfalfa, corn, oats, and other grains. Edwin Jr. married Alma Schaefer from Pueblo. She had come from Newton, Kansas to attend school at St. Mary's Hospital and graduated with the first class of nurses. They raised 4 children, Edwin Frederick and Lawrence Theodore from his first marriage with Rosa Boyce, and then Virginia and Philip from his second marriage with Alma. Edwin Frederick was born on the 24th of May, 1904. He attended school in Florence, and they went to A&M in Fort Collins. When he returned to Florence from college, he went to work for the Continental Oil Company refinery. He married Eunice Galbraith in 1930. They moved when he had to transfer to Commerce City. He had worked for the Continental for 42 years when he retired. The horse remount program with President Theodore Roosevelt in the Army was a prosperous one until after the Second World War. The primary purpose was to train and issue mounts and artillery horses to units fighting around the world. Roosevelt bartered with Lobach for the government to obtain horses for these troops. He specifically wanted polo horses. The President and Edwin both loved horses, and they would try to outdo one another. But when it came to taming the broncs, Edwin did it better. Edwin also favored the Cleveland Bay, which is a horse, and had a Hamiltonian stallion named Ben. The 1892 brick home had a parlor, 14 by 18, with a floor covered with a rich carpet and furniture covered with brocade. The sitting room was connected by an archway and had an open hearth and mantel. Next came the library. A hall led to the stairway and into the dining room. In front of the dining room was the bedroom for the adults. Second story had 2 large sunny rooms for the girls, while across the hallway was Junior's room. There was also a storeroom and 2 smaller rooms. Although there have been 5 generations of the family to have lived in the house, not all at the same time, but at first I thought, oh gee, John was doing well, wasn't he? The finished lumber to make the woodwork on the inside of the house was ordered, cut to fit from a friend in Denver. It was decorated and shipped to Florence, ready to be installed. Edwin Lobach, in recalling the early days of Florence, tells of a man being shot on Front Street, which was then a main business section of town. A wagon was pulled over his body and left until the coroner came from Canyon City in his horse and buggy. This always took several hours. The main business center of the community happened to be Coal Creek. Florence was small, I'm not going to say unimportant, but Coal Creek had the shops, the stores, the coal, and the people, because there were at least 10,000 living there at that point. The cattle and the horses used to range all around the country, and Lobach had to round them up, bring them home every night for feeding. One day, as he rode out towards Coal Creek to bring in the cattle, his horse stepped into a gopher hole and threw him on the ground with such force that he was knocked unconscious. There was a woman who lived in the neighborhood who saw this, but she thought he was dead and wouldn't go close to him. Eventually, he returned to consciousness and was able to get home. While the city is now laid out in blocks, there are plenty of good concrete sidewalks. Edwin Jr. recalled the time when there were only a few wooden sidewalks. The first few years he attended public schools He and the other boys of the neighborhood cut through the pastures and only had 2 or 3 blocks downtown where there were walks of any kind. His father received cement receipts that showed that he had 90 days to lay cement in those places. If he didn't, the work would be done by the city and Edwin would be so charged. One of the most important enterprises that I see from this family is the building and development of the water system through the Union Ditch and Water Company. Many of the early ditches were constructed by miners to divert stream water for their mining operations without regard for water access rights. Others were constructed by farmers who moved north from Mexico and implemented their traditional irrigation systems. Today, it is no longer legal to dig a diversion ditch and help yourself to water from a river or a stream, even if it crosses your land. Ditch companies purchase water rights and develop storage and delivery systems to their members. Farmers and ranchers purchase stock in a ditch company and then are entitled to a certain amount of water from a ditch based on how much stock they own. They also pay annual fees that cover the use and maintenance of the ditch system. Responsible. They also include the services of the ditch rider, who's responsible for regular maintenance and operation of the head gates. Edwin Sr. helped dig the Union Ditch along with, listen to these names, Jesse Frazier, Stephen and G.B. Frazier, William Locke, Henry Frazier, and others, and the surveyor was John K. Brewster Jr. We've heard these names. They're exciting names. They're the beginning of our town. Both Edwin Jr. and his father Sr. were directors and ditch riders of the Union. Aren't they good-looking men? Second would be oil and the refineries. In 1872, a group of pioneers pooled their money to organize the Arkansas Valley Oil Company. The Lowback farm had struck a 3-barrel well, which was drilled in their cornfield in 1880 and pumped until 1982. By 1884, Union Oil Company moved in. By 1886, the crude oil produced in the entire field was about 60 barrels every 24 hours. What a heyday it must have been. Real estate helped with the land sales and development. Several additions were added to the town for the residents. Lowback additions 1, 2, 3, and Castle Rock Park. The Frazier additions. The McCandless additions. Yes, Florence was growing. During this time, Sr. also built the brick 2-story business building on Main Street. Some of the early interests in the store, a clothing store, the Elks Lodge, a grocery and dry goods. The Florence Citizen was also out there. at one time. Edwin Sr. was in Canyon City at the Fremont County Bank, and the doors were closed with crowds milling around out front. He went to the back door where he found his friend, Fred Reynolds, most distracted. The crowd was trying to start a run on the bank, so Edwin went out. Everyone knew him. He said he would back Fred Reynolds with every penny he had because they knew, respected him. The run was stopped. John has given an oral history of his remembrances and experiences. He is the son of Philip and was born in 1947. He has a sister, Carolyn, and I'm sorry if the ladies got gypped this time. Next time I'll do the females. He has a son, Andrew Phillip, who is also here with him tonight, this afternoon. John worked for Dairy Farmers of America and became transportation supervisor. He is a Vietnam veteran. He's also been a dedicated ditch rider and a 20-year director of the Union Ditch and Water Company. It's interesting to note that the ditch company is 107.5 years old and is a non-profit as of January 5th, 1914, and that non-profit was a C12, which was brand new denotion to me. The first 5 directors of the ditch were Stephen Tanner, Virgil Tanner, Jesse Frazier, Edwin Lobeck Sr., and James A. McCandless. It's important to note that the ditch was dug in 1861. That was a long time prior to the dates that we're told that the area was settled around here. Of his father, Philip, John says he graduated in 1930. He also died at the age of 86, just like his father Junior. He could think outside the box. He had an excellent memory and was a good horseman. In thinking about the holidays, John says at Christmas time, while Grandpa, which would have been Edwin Jr., was alive, they all gathered at his house, but after he died, everyone stayed home. Happens a lot, doesn't it? Their big holiday changed to Thanksgiving and Memorial Day at John's house. He remembers everything was handed down or willed, with everyone getting equal portions. Now I have to tell you another little funny type thing. I know I'm not a funny person, but this is another funny. I want to tell you about John's first babysitter. The name was Applejack, a 16.5 hands bay horse. From the time John was age 2 to age 5, his father and grandfather, Philip and Edwin Jr., would put a child's saddle on the horse and plunk John down in it, where he'd stay all day long. Now, I don't know if that's really funny, because that could be considered something else. As long as he could be seen by the men, though, they figured they could do their work and John was safe. Philip was in Pioneer Day Parade in 1955 and won a prize as cowboy. He was riding his big Palomino horse. The Lobacks gave all their wagons and harnesses to Buckskin Joe in about 1963. The only thing they kept was one stagecoach. I asked John what he felt was the legacy of Edwin Loback Sr., and he answered me, instilling a work ethic in each of the family members. Nothing's handed to you. Put your money in the right places and you make a living for your family. Thank you, John, for all the time you spent with Mel and me. Thank you. I'm supposed to introduce it. I'm sorry, Dorothy. Dorothy Cool is next on our agenda, and she is going to talk about the two Tooth brothers. It's very interesting, and we love hearing Dorothy. Thank you.
The Tooths. Can you imagine having that name? And you spell it T-O-O-F. And if there's more than one, you would put an apostrophe S. Tooths. Strange name. And you know, when I first moved here, back in 20 years ago, and I lived in Penrose, I would hear the word Tooths occasionally, and I would think, what a strange name. I wonder what nationality that could be. And then when Marty said, would you like to do the Tooths? I said, yes, I would love to find out more about the Tooths. And I did. The Tooths, by the way, are Germans. Their grandfather had immigrated from Germany to Canada. And 3 of his sons, the ones who first came to Penrose, were born between 1830 and 1840. This talk is basically about 2 of them, and that is going to be James Alfred, or Al, and George. However, most of the family did converge on this area before long, and I believe that there is still Tooths living in Pueblo. Anyway, the Tooths, the 2 Tooth boys, Al and George, came when Maurice Ledoux was still in charge of the hardscrabble placita. Do you remember Sylvia's talk on hardscrabble and the placita? Can't hear me?
Yeah, I'll remember.
He remembers.
He remembers, that's cool. Okay, when Alexander Barclay and George Simpson were living there south of Florence, that's part of Sylvia's talk too, Alexander Barclay, there he is, was an English nobleman who, my spirit lady, you know, Teresita is my spirit lady. I sometimes come and pretend to be her. Teresita fell in love with, back to Barclay. Can you imagine these 2? Barclay, this is George Simpson. Okay, can you go back?
Yep. Sure.
Go too far, there.
There he is.
Them two. The little Spanish lady. And that picture is the only one of her that we know of. And it was drawn by Barclay when he first saw her when she was coming up from the creek, washing clothes. She had a basket on her head, and he drew it. What are you doing? Whatever. George Simpson, go ahead, Carol. George Simpson was her, Teresita's, ne'er-do-well son-in-law, who was married to her daughter, Cruzetta, and he would leave her, his wife, Cruzetta, alone for years, and Teresita hated him. And George was the man who actually died on the riverboat while he was heading back to St. Louis. They put him in a coffin filled with ice to postpone decomposure. And he woke up. True story. And you know what? He lived to become a valuable man. He is, I can't even choke up at this, is buried in Trinidad up on the hill where he held off Indians for 5 days till help came. Okay, that's good enough for that. Okay, in 1860, the Civil War was gearing up. At the same time, Colorado began filling up. The gold rush was on. In 1859 and 1860, Canyon City, by the way, it was not named Canyon City at that time, it was called Gate City. In those days was coming to life. And just as suddenly it emptied as everyone returned to their lives and obligations back home. The Tooths, here we go. The Tooths were said to be robust and manly men who tended to business. They stayed when everyone was leaving and bought property at the mouth of Beaver Creek on the Arkansas River. The two of them built adjoining cabins with a breezeway roof separating them. Duplexes, really. The Ute Indians loved this area as well and camped everywhere along the creek. As late as 1980, it was said that you could still see teepee rings. Teepee rings, do you know what that is? The remains of a teepee could still be found in the area. And that area is south of Top Rail Ranch. You just turn to the right when you're heading toward Pueblo and get on Highway or Road 120 and just go a little ways more and you can see the remains of the Tooth land. By the way, oh, the bears that lived along the Arkansas River. One day, Alfred came home to find a bear in his kitchen. Since he was a very industrious man of unusual size and vitality, he kicked the bear out the window. Okay, that's okay. Not long after they settled in, they built homes, quarrying the shale from the Great Cliffs. They built a general store, a blacksmith's shop, and a hostelry which means a hotel. A quote from L was, "We did a nice business with people headed west. Roads converged at halfway crossing on Beaver Creek from Pueblo and Colorado City. Stagecoaches, wagons, wagon trains, pioneers, and miners stopped for repairs, for rest, or to go refit their wagons. The Tooths farmed and sold vegetables to the miners. They sold hay and grain to the travelers, and it was said that the bluffs were turned into green islands of their crops." This article is written by one of the Tooths. I don't know which one. It's one of them, written in 1919. Would you believe I'm reading this without my glasses? Anyway, this article says it all. Down the creek where Beaver Creek emptied into the Arkansas, weary travelers either went on up to what later was Canyon City and over the mountains, or turned north and went up the creek, past the Callises and the Kellys and Glendale. But here lived the Tooths, George and Al. They had built a general store of gray shale rocks, a blacksmith shop, and a corral for tired mules, oxen, and horses. They did a lively business in shoeing horses and mules, mending broken harnesses, retreading iron wheels, making plowshares and myriad of other blacksmith work. They stocked their store with coffee, flour, and other necessities of the trail, farmed their mesa area till it was a pretty island in the rock cliffs. They had a big business from the stagecoaches and wagons and miners who passed through the busy area. Their supplies came in mostly from wagon trains from Missouri. The Utes came by and always wanted matches. Strange, huh? This is the way it was. There was the smell of dust and sweating animals, wet leather, axle grease, and musty wagons, mingled with the odors of raw tobacco as it was chewed, smoked, or sniffed. There was the sound of neighing horses, bawling oxen, and livestock, chattering visitors, and the clanking of unloading or refitting supply wagons, all blending in with the ring of heavy hammers against anvils, and the beating out of the iron hearts with smoke and fire flying. This was the scene of how new beginnings were made and pioneering was moved along. Now, let's skip through these colorful, wonderful, eventful years, 60 of them, and take ourselves up to 1919, when this article was written. Can you imagine? But I have another little story that goes along with it, how the mingling of the Reynolds family and the Tooths family. Okay, there is the Reynolds family. In the late summer of 1861, several hundred rebel sympathizers gathered near Beulah, Colorado. Union troops were alerted and 44 rebels were captured and taken to Denver. Among that 44 was James, George, and John Reynolds, three brothers who had lived in this area. In 1862, 36 of those 44 escaped, along with the 3 Reynolds brothers. Several skirmishes occurred in southern Colorado, near Bronson, Colorado, and along the Greenhorn River. It was thought these Confederates were the escapees. Perhaps they were on their way up the Front Range to aid the Reynolds brothers in capturing Denver. A unit under Jim Reynolds made its way to the Arkansas River to Canyon City. The town was practically deserted in those days. Only Anson Rudd and Felix Burdett lived there. Anson later reported that he was too poor to leave, or he would have. Jim Reynolds' unit for the Confederacy moved into South Park, robbing and destroying stages and stealing horses from the Union supply trains. The locals retaliated and the rebels split up, with John Reynolds heading back to New Mexico. Shortly after that, one morning, 3 unidentified men showed up at the Tooth Ranch asking for breakfast. Al Tooth invited them in, but he was suspicious, thinking that he recognized them. He told them, I have some chores to do, but when I get back, I will make your breakfast. He left and found his brother George and 2 other men to help him capture the rebel men. Did you know all this was happening right here in Fremont County, the Civil War? Anyway, those 2 extra men that he found were afraid to touch the rebels, so his wife, Ada, had to disarm them. Five others were captured in Canyon City. One of those men was Jim Reynolds. They were all taken to Denver. A short time later, Uncle Dick Wooten, have you heard of him? He was a well-liked, colorful character of that time and a well-known Confederate sympathizer. And he said he found those 5 men shackled to a tree, hand to hand, decomposing corpses. Anyway, for a long time, local residents were on alert for rebel raiders. Later investigation proved that the Reynolds gang were documented Confederate soldiers. In 1871, after the war, there was a gunfight in Taos, New Mexico. One of the gunfighters was identified as John Reynolds. On his deathbed, he drew this map of South Park, where all the loot taken from the robberies had been hidden. You want to check it out pretty well and go see if you can find it, because it has never been found. And so that is the end of my story about the Tooths and the Reynolds, which was an unbelievable thing to me. Okay, next is going to be Mel Benham, and she's going to do a talk on Stephen Jennings Tanner, a well-known Florence resident.
Stephen Jennings Tanner, whose name is familiar in early history of our area, was among the rugged, hard-working pioneers who arrived before there was a town and before there was a railroad to reach this area. His arrival, however, was preceded by a year by his father Richard and stepmother Sarah, lovingly known to her stepchildren as Aunt Sally. Sarah and Richard had come from Paris, Texas, to this area in 1870, leaving Stephen and his family behind to close down their business enterprises there, which included a tannery and farming operations. With that work complete, Stephen and his wife traveled from Paris by train, arriving in Denver with their small children, Billy, 3, and Nellie, 1. 2 loaded wagons with horses were also unloaded from the train in Denver, and the family made a several-day journey via wagon trails to their new home on the Arkansas River, just about 100 miles south of the depot. Stephen secured farm acreage on the eastern edge of what would become the platted town, along what is known as Tanner Avenue. Running north of 3rd Street, this land would bring him fortune and failure, joy and pain over the next 35 years, and from it he would contribute in many ways to the new community that grew up around him. As one of the leading citizens of early Florence, the Florence Weekly Tribune of November 20th, 1908 announced his death and said, "Mr. Tanner came to Florence nearly 40 years ago, just about the time or a little later than Jesse Frazier, James McCandless, and Mr. Loback, and before any railroad. Thus he is one of the very oldest pioneers in Fremont County. He has been identified with every enterprise that has been a benefit to the community. Coming to Florence about the year of 1871, he engaged in farming, stock raising, and dairying, and he has also been interested in various enterprises, has made heavy investments in mines, etc. He was prominently connected with the Union Ditch in the early days and served the company for a long time as its secretary. He was for a long time a valued member of the school board and has always taken a very active interest in the welfare of the schools. He has served the county well in the capacity of a county commissioner. Just 2 years after their move to Colorado, and 13 days after their daughter Stella was born, August 29th, 1873, his wife Charlotte died. Charlotte is said to have been the first burial in what is now Union Highlands Cemetery. Also buried there that same year was Stephen's father, Richard. In an account of Stephen Tanner's death, the Weekly Tribune read, "He and his father located Highlands Cemetery as a family burial ground. His first wife was the first person buried there, and his father about the 3rd. Union Highland was known for years as the Tanner Cemetery." A year after Charlotte passed away, Stephen married Mary Harris Smith, the daughter of Reverend William Munson Smith. The Smiths had come to the area just prior to the Tanners' arrival, perhaps in 1868 or 1869. Reverend Smith served as a minister and presiding elder of the Denver district of Methodist Episcopal Church, and later the M.E. Church South in Colorado and New Mexico. Richard, like his father and grandfather, had a large family. Stephen was the oldest of 9 children, born January 29, 1837, in McLean County, Kentucky, near Owensboro. When he was about 20, he moved with his family to northeast Texas. Of Richard's family of 9, only 3 lived beyond their teens. Erastus served along with Stephen in the Confederate Army during the Civil War, but became ill and died soon after returning home. Stephen's brother, Virgil, also came to Florence and is listed on the 1870 census in the household of his father and Sarah. He was a successful physician and surgeon in this area until his untimely death at the age of 31. Virgil married Jenny Smith, sister of Stephen's second wife, Mary Smith. They had one son, Ned. In developing this series of programs, Voices of the Archive, we look for descriptions of the life and times of pioneers in their own words, their own writing. Settlers like Stephen Tanner made that job less complicated by writing his autobiography, in which he gives a description of his many activities, fortunes and misfortunes. He wrote, "Reaching here in 1871, the unexpected continued to happen until I was bound hand and foot in ranching. And then the unexpected kept company with me for 22 years. Floods came, ditches broke, flumes went out, water was short in my head gates, floods repeatedly destroyed fencing and crops, rust ate up the corn crops, and smut blasted wheat crops. High prices for labor and low prices for farm products, both grain and fed stock, and what seemed worse, an almost fatal kick on the forehead by a shod horse, producing a concussion in the right back head, the effects of which is now 17 years later still with me. Followed by a sickness that for 17 days paralyzed consciousness, and at the crisis there was no hope for my recovery. Cold and unconscious, I was thought to be gone. Later, a fall from a horse jarred consciousness out of me for many hours. Then the piercing of my instep with a pitchfork, making a wound that did not bleed, purple and threatening with lockjaw for 15 days. A fall from the top of my burning house, jarring my already shattered nervous system and breaking a rib. Troubled all the years after the kick by the sense of a heavy weight in my right back head finally culminated in a stroke of falling sickness, as if I were falling in an endless abyss, and all the world coming on me. These strokes leaving me almost a dead man, unable to be or feel steady, could not sit on a spring mattress, ride in a buggy or horseback, nor sit in a rocking chair, or tip my head forward at the table to take food from a spoon. And 12 months after the stroke, could take doctor's remedies no longer. Being in a most uncomfortable condition, but relief came from an unexpected but invisible sources, and my condition gradually changed until I became very much improved. During these years, my indebtedness increased annually, and my farm was covered with mortgages. Like a drowning man catching at a straw, I undertook marning and spent about $2,500. Then undertook farming with another party in Montrose and lost $4,000, and later sunk a full $6,000 in mining in Cripple Creek, Colorado. Had numerous deals and leases on my place when the oil boom came, all of which seemed to be fortunate. Secured the benefit of an option sale of $3,500. Sold 24 acres for $8,000 and 10 acres for $1,000. Leased 80 acres at a monthly rental of $150 and received several hundred rental money. Then received the benefit of $8,000 rental money applied on payment of old mortgages, and finally sold the premises for $40,000. A sum of $10,000 present payment on outside notes and $29,000 secured by trustee on the premises, and $10,000 in cash cash in hand, notes at 7% interest. Built a substantial 12-room brick residence, the rooms all large and airy, with 3 fireplaces, stone walks, and all convenient outbuildings. 6 lots for my wife, planted 150 select trees on 2 lots, and then a 5-room residence in the town of Florence at $1,200. And 2 acres in Lowback Addition at $1,100. And now, in spite of our rigid economy, our living is diminishing annually, so that I'm still trying my fortune at mining, hoping for that success that I so much need in order to help my own home, wife, and minor children, and also to help my grown children into an easier and more pleasant way of making a living. And also that I may have money to spend freely than heretofore for benevolent purposes. The 11 children of Stephen Tanner, who lived beyond childhood, all grew up in Florence, attending local schools. William, Billy, the oldest, married Susie Hannon of a pioneer Wetmore family. He and Ed Jagger, husband of his sister Nellie, lived in adjoining properties in the 1200 block of West 3rd Street, where for many years they operated Riverside Dairy. Located on the west edge of town, in later years, this same dairy was operated by William's son, Jerome, Brownie, Wilson, and Russell, and was known as the Tanner Dairy. That property is found on the west by Lowback Avenue. As a girl, Mary, along with her family, was crossing the plains in a covered wagon when they came across a band of Indians. The old chief stopped William Smith's wagon. In the wagon, Mary, about 5 years old, was making tatting with a small wooden shuttle made by her brother Waddy. The old chief asked for this shuttle, which she gave him fearfully, and by so doing, won the train safe passage through all the tribes. Mary became the mother of 9 children, bringing to 13 children of Stephen Tanner. Of the 13, the first and last died in early childhood. The other 11, all married, all but 2 had children of their own, giving Stephen 35 grandchildren. Of the boys who lived to manhood, Munson, the youngest, bore the nickname Doc throughout his long life, though his career was in mining and milling. This nickname seems somehow related to Doc Virgil Tanner and has been associated with the still existing Tanner home, though the reason for it remains a mystery. And Munson spent his entire adult life outside of Colorado. Strangely enough, it remained to William to carry on the Tanner name, as it had for his father before him. None of the other male children of Stephen had sons who lived to have sons of their own. William had 5 sons, and 7 sons, who in turn had 7 sons to carry on the name. The large house mentioned in the concluding words of Stephen's autobiography, built in 1896, still stands on Tanner Avenue, which runs north off of East 3rd Street. The top story and a half were removed during its history, probably in the late 1960s. After the year 2000, the property was purchased and renovated by Dick and Pauline Upton, the second story restored and the grounds and outbuildings refurbished. Upton is the current mayor of Florence. Thank you. And I'd like to have Rita come up, and she's going to do our closing for us.
When the title of this lecture series was developed and agreed upon, I looked around the table and I realized that the voices were not going to be coming from the books on the shelves or the stacks of newspapers, but it would also be coming from the women around the table. I am honored to tell you, but for a few of us, the members of your Florence Historical Archives are published writers. Beyond being dedicated to preserving history and being great resources for others, they are the voice of the archive in its most present form. Millie Windsor, author, co-author for Fremont Heritage Council. Dorothy Cool, author of 5 books, and she is a contributor to Fremont County's geocache sites. She's done 40. Carol McNew, author, co-writer, editor, Fremont Historical Society, the Heritage Council, and she writes a weekly article for the Crusaders newspaper. Dion Bowden, author, editor. Marty Lacoste, author, editor, and grant writer. Margaret editor, co-author. She is of the Territorial Daughters of Colorado, the Heritage Council, and the Fremont Historical Society. I'm the money-minded person, so I have brought books from our bookstore, some of the rare pieces, some of the hard-to-find gifts. They're in the back. Please take a moment and look. We also have a website where you can link to our gift shop. These are all ways that you can help support your archive. In addition to donating maybe a history book, a map, pictures, family history, and financially, think about becoming a voice of the archive as well by volunteering. We can always use readers. As part of the voice of now and of the future, this last school year, we were able to share with 5th and 6th graders from the elementary school here in Florence, and like them, you have been great listeners. We hope that we have entertained and enlightened you with our passion of history and the voices of the archive. Our thanks to all that are dedicated in preserving Florence and Fremont's history, the bell tower and our sound man, John, the recording team from the Royal Gorge Museum and History Center. Thank you. Please join us for refreshments, meet the voices of your archive, and maybe you can get one of your books signed by one of our authors. Thank you.